In Search of Knowledge, Past, Present, and Future is a series of unique programs that are designed to show our history as a living history rather than just a list of names and facts about people in the past. It is a Black history lesson, a vocational tool to interest people in various occupations, and a mini museum containing books, artifacts, and photos of notable Blacks bringing an original art exhibit directly to the classroom. Lamont Steptoe, a Viet Nam vet, is an award-winning poet, photographer, independent publisher, and activist. Lamont, welcome to In Search of Knowledge.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Lamont, you and I share two loves, and that's writing and photography. And you've been an artist for a number of years. So I'm going to concede to you and ask you to read your artist statement for me and talk about the publication.
Okay. This anthology is called Of Poetry and Protest, and it was published by W.W. Norton. It just came out this June, and the subtitle is From Emmett Till to Trayvon Martin, two young men who were tragically taken from us due to racism. So I have an artistic statement in here. This is my page in the anthology.
And a beautiful photo.
And yeah, I like it as well. And that photo, as I said, was taken at Sonia Sanchez's house.
Okay.
I was born a poet. It is my belief that poets are born, not made. Early indications of the born poet are a penchant for books, intuitive insight, and precocious innate knowledge of things beyond a child's experience. A love of stories, especially stories told by adults about their lives. The ability to remember what others have forgotten or don't want to remember. A sense of mission. I write to overcome injustice and invisibility. I write because I love creating thoughts with words to move, excite, enrage, and engage humanity. I write to change the world. It was during the magical moments of my childhood when I witnessed everything with a sense of wonder that I began to feel strange, unlike others. I was a watcher. Memory became essential to my being. When you realize you are in the world to create, to be in love with truth and beauty, then only death becomes the thing that stops you. I am befuddled at all the beings that pass through life with no desire or passion to leave a record of what it is they experienced. That has always mystified me. It is what keeps me writing. It is what keeps me fighting against oblivion. It is what keeps me writing. My poetic influences were Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, James Weldon Johnson, Edna St. Vincent Millay, Edgar Lee Masters, Edgar Allan Poe, Eleanor Wiley. Later, Paul Laurence Dunbar, Langston Hughes, James Baldwin, Amiri Baraka, Richard Wright, Gwendolyn Brooks, Samuel Allen, Dennis Brutus, Ted Jones, Mari Evans, Nikki Giovanni, Margaret Walker Alexander, Ishmael Reed, Sonia Sanchez, Helene Johnson, Dudley Randall, Etheridge Knight. I don't see my poet life as a career. That implies academia. I am a poet, priest, shaman. I like to think of myself as an enfant terrible who can always be counted on to shock, enrage, and outrage whoever is listening.
Thank you. That's, wow. I gotta take that in for a moment. But it's interesting that you asked to do that because a lot of what I wanted to talk to you about, you've already included. Because I wanted to talk to you about where you got your love of writing, and it's obvious you've gone through the list of how you've gotten that done. The other question that I have for you that I want to ask You said a poet is born.
Mhm.
And I believe that. I think that that's within us. It just has to be developed enough to come out. But what was the best advice you received when you decided that you were going to become this poet writer?
Well, I started writing when I was 10 years old.
Okay.
And I grew up in a black church. And it was a Methodist church, but we had a fire and brimstone minister. And they were going to urban renew our neighborhood. Now they call it gentrification. So I wrote a lament about the fact that we were going to lose our church and lose our community. I read it to several groups in the church, and word got back to the minister. And one day, on a Sunday morning, he announced to the congregation, "We have a poet in our midst." And I had never called myself that yet. But when he said that, a little light went on. And suddenly I understood why I was so weird.
So was that your first act of activism?
Yes.
Okay. You also, I have to do full disclosure. You and I have been friends for a while, and you were one of the first to call me a poet. I don't know if you knew that, but you were one of the first to call me a poet. So I understand what that feels like to actually have a title to what you do. And you were the first one to allow me to publish a book of poetry under your company. So I wanted to make a full disclosure, and that's Whirlwind Press, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Was this the career that you thought you would have as a teen?
Well, I knew that I would write all my life. But I also was aware that I had to get a higher education. I was the first one in my family to graduate from high school. I was the first one to go to college and graduate from college. And I graduated from Temple University with a degree in radio, television, and film.
Okay.
So, you know, when you said to people, "Oh, I'm a poet," generally the response would be, "You better get a job."
You got to have something to back that up.
So I wanted to go into something, and I started my photography at 14.
Okay.
I started taking photographs when I was 14 years old. So I wanted to be able to tap into my creative ability, but yet at the same time be able to make a living.
Prestigious awards in your lifetime.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Later on, I would get fellowships from the Pennsylvania Academy of the Art, Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. I won 2 awards from them. But it was never my intention, you know, to seek awards. You know, one time I was complaining to Sonia Sanchez about being poor and not having enough money, and she said, "Lamont, just keep writing, the money will come."
Okay.
And so later on, when I won the PEW Fellowship in the Arts, that was a real eye-opener for a lot of members of my family, because I never really received a lot of support from my family members for what I was doing.
Explain what the PEW is, because we want to stay on.
Well, the PEW is a very prestigious award that's given here in Philadelphia. You have to live in one of the 5 counties. It's money that comes from Sun Oil. And it initially started in 1992. The purpose of it is to encourage you, for emerging writers and established writers, to encourage you and give you the freedom to continue to do what you want to do.
And you get an actual year, I believe?
Well, you can either take it in 1 year or 2 years.
Okay.
I took it in 1 year.
But the whole idea is the support that you were talking about, to have the freedom to write.
Yes.
And many writers don't get that opportunity.
Exactly.
So what was that freedom like for you?
Well, that year that I won the PEW, I spent the entire year working on my memoir. You know, I wrote 1,500 pages of my memoir.
Have you published it yet?
No.
Okay.
No, because it's not a linear memoir.
Okay.
It's circuitous. The best way to put it is it's Proustian.
So,
You know, if you know anything about Marcel Proust's writing, Stream of Consciousness.
okay.
So it's a stream of consciousness kind of piece. And I won't consider myself nearly finished until I've written at least 7,000 pages.
Okay.
Because when you're in your 50s and 60s, all those memories are not going to come to you like that. But you have to put yourself in that zone. And as you keep yourself in that zone, different memories will float to the top, you know. Well, the other impetus was, you know, I grew up very impoverished. My mother raised 4 of us by herself with the help of extended family. And the old folks around me, as they saw me, I was always a bookworm. And the old folks who sometime only had a 3rd grade education or a 6th grade education, they would say to me, boy, you stick with those books. You stick with those books. And I told them, I said, I would. And I said, and when I reach the pinnacle where I'm headed, I will not forget you. I will be your voice. I wanted my mother's name to be in the history books.
Okay.
And it is.
And they are. So what made you become a publisher?
Well, my late mentor, South African poet Dennis Brutus, who spent time in Robben Island breaking stones with Nelson Mandela, that he was shot before they took him there. When he came into my life, one of the things he said to me was, Lamont, you should interview me. So I must have published at least no less than 7 interviews that are out there that I did with Dennis Brutus. But I wanted to, I was always inspired by what Marcus Garvey had said in terms of the whirlwind. He said, look for me in the whirlwind or the storm, where with God's grace I will bring with me millions of Africans who died in Africa and the Americas to aid you in your fight for life, liberty, and freedom. And then, of course, Gwendolyn Brooks, she also has a whirlwind metaphor where she says, conduct your blooming in the noise and whip of the whirlwind. So the whirlwind was always a powerful image for me. And being the fact that I'm an Aquarius and an air sign, as I was growing up, I was always fascinated by the wind. It seemed like the wind was telling me what my future would be. The wind was calling me. The wind has always called me. And I was always entranced by the wind. You know, I like to live in high places where I can hear the wind at night. So I figured, let me start my own press, because there's plenty of publication opportunities for Euro-Americans and other hyphenated Americans. But black publishers are few and far between. And so I wanted to establish Whirlwind Press to give a number of black writers the opportunity to get their work out without being judged, you know, by other criteria. The only black writer that I knew about in high school was James Weldon Johnson, because his poem, The Creation, was in our textbook. But there were no other black authors. I didn't find out about Langston Hughes till I was in college. I didn't find out about Paul Laurence Dunbar or Juniper Harmon or Phyllis Wheatley. I didn't find out about any of those people until I had gone to college. But I always read, and the thing she told us was, you cannot write if you do not read.
Thank you. Say that again. Say that again.
You cannot write if you do not read.
Right, so let's go back to Gwendolyn Brooks. How did you meet Gwendolyn Brooks?
Well, she was here in Philadelphia to receive an award, and I wrote a poem for her, and it wouldn't be until years later in Ann Arbor, Michigan, at a conference around the life of the late poet Robert Hayden, that I read my poem to her directly. And she said, her response to it was, that is a thoroughly black poem. But I knew of Gwendolyn from her work. I had read We Real Cool. I had read, you know, her work, knew her work before I met her. And I was also aware that she was the first black poet to receive the Pulitzer Prize. And she told me that when she received it, the poet Wallace Stevens, who wouldn't win it until 1955, his response was, who let the coon in? And Gwendolyn told me that herself. So I was very aware who she was long before I met her.
So what would you like our youth to know about Gwendolyn Brooks?
Well, when Gwendolyn won the Pulitzer Prize in 1950, she had come out with the book, I believe, Annie Allen. And there was a conference held at Fisk University. So she was a Negro poet, a Negro poet.
That's what they were called in those days.
And this conference, at at Fisk University, that was attended by Mary Baraka and Don L. Lee, who is now Hakeem Adabudi.
A Third World Press.
Right.
Publishing company.
And they took, and Robert Hayden was there. Robert Hayden, I think, had arranged the conference. And they took Robert Hayden, Baraka, and some of the more radical black nationalist poets took them to task for not holding the empire's feet to the fire. And that was a cathartic experience for Gwendolyn Brooks. She realized what she had to do, you know. So she took her prize and she used it for the good of black people. She liked the term black over African American. And it changed her life, you know, it changed her life. It sent her in a direction that she could have otherwise turned her back on. She could have won, you know, been more traditional Negro poet and accumulated a lot of other prizes from the empire. But she took that prize and used it to begin to speak directly to the circumstances of black people.
One of the other people that I know that you are very familiar with, and again, sometimes you can't learn everything about a person at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I heard you speak at the Afro-American Museum about the film James Baldwin
Mm-hmm.
that I realized how deep your friendship was with him. When did you meet James Baldwin in person?
Well, I met James Baldwin in 1985 when he came to the African American Museum to publish his book, to promote his book, The Price of the Ticket.
Okay.
And someone had called in a death threat. And so he had 4 bodyguards with him. Now, I was working at the Painted Bride Art Center at the time. And I left my job at 5:30 and went over to the museum and sat in the front row because I wanted to make sure I saw James Baldwin. So when he eventually arrived, there were 2 bodyguards in front and 2 bodyguards in back. And I had read a lot of his work. And I didn't realize he was such a diminutive person, you know, in terms of small like myself. And so he gets up and does his thing, and I'm taking photographs of him and everything. Now, if you're on the front row, when it comes time to sell books, sign books, by the time you get upstairs, you're 30 people back.
Right.
So I get upstairs, I'm 30 people back, I have a stack of books like that, and one of the late trustees of the museum says, "He's not signing all these books." And when he said that, my face fell. And one of his bodyguards saw the look on my face, pointed to me, parted the crowd, and in a minute I was in front of Baldwin. And I said, "Mr. Baldwin, I have waited my whole life for this moment." And he put down his pen and shook my hand, and that was the beginning of our association.
So what would you like our youth to know about James Baldwin? Because you talked about that when we were at the art museum. At the Afro-American Museum.
Baldwin was a prophet, an honest-to-God prophet. He was raised in a black church. He was a minister at age 14, preaching, child minister. And he was an associate of Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X. He was a playwright, an essayist, a poet, a novelist, and an activist. And of course, he told people that he was gay. You know, he didn't allow that to be used against him. You know, he said, "You didn't tell me, I told you." And the other thing was that he had been mentored by Richard Wright. And because of Richard Wright, he followed Wright to Paris after Wright was in Paris. And that sort of put me on this thing that I said, oh, to be a great writer, I have to go to Paris, I have to go to Amsterdam, I have to go, you know. So he gave me that sense that, you know, you have to get up and go, you have to travel, you know. The best piece of advice I ever got was when I was a student at Temple, taking a freshman course in English composition. And it was being taught by a white graduate student. And when he found out I wanted to be a writer, he said to me, do not go to graduate school for writing. They will ruin you. He said, just keep writing and live a life worth writing about. And so because I had read Hemingway and how he drove an ambulance in 1936, Spanish Civil War, and because I was influenced by the soldier poets of World War I, Wilfred Owen and Alan Seeger, I said, oh, to be a great writer, you have to put yourself in harm's way. So that was part of my rationale when I volunteered to go to Vietnam. And people, you know, people told me, you're going to die in Vietnam, you're going to do this. I said, no, no. I said, no, no, no. I mean, even my professors in college, when I was dropping out to go to Vietnam, they told me, Lamont, we know you're a romantic, but those are very real bullets. I said, I'll be fine. And then a brother who just came back from Vietnam, who I met at Strawbridge and Clothier when we were both working there, he gave me my street education here. He takes off his shirt and shows me 7 bullet holes in his back. He was in the battle of the Ai Drang Valley, the first time the North Vietnamese army met the United States Army. He was in that battle. So he takes off his shirt and shows me 7 bullet holes in his back, and he says, you want this to happen to you? I said, that's not going to happen to me. He said, okay, be stupid. He said, I'll tell you one thing, Vietnam's going to make you cry for your mother. And that part came true.
So, given all of that, and we haven't really talked in depth about your activism, and you're quite active in the community. Given what's going on today in the world, and you and I were talking about a couple of incidents before we started the interview, what would you like the youth of today to know about being an activist?
Well, you have to be informed, you know, and the only way to be informed is to read. You know, reading has to be a part of your life as naturally as you take it in air. You know, you have to read. You have to read everything, you know, everything. You know, Chinese writers, Mexican writers, Native American writers. You have to read it all, you know, and just devour books because it empowers you. It gives you the power of the word. Everything begins with the word. You know, like I have a poem published in this anthology called Def Jam, a Def Jam poetry anthology, sponsored by Russell Simmons.
Okay.
And the poem goes like this. In black churches, I saw what the word could do. Make cripples walk, make others talk in strange tongues, get old arthritic grandmothers out they seats to dance, give dirty low-down sinners another chance, give some folks the strength of 20 men. In black churches, I saw what the word could do. Witness testified, heard gospel from African souls. In black churches, I was chiseled into speech and thunder.
Wow. And that's what activism is truly about.
Yes.
It's not just about being on the street to hold up a sign. It's about what you do before and after you hit the streets.
Well, like Ishmael Reed said, he has a book called Writing is Fighting.
Okay.
Writing is fighting. You know, you have to be, Langston Hughes said, a poet must hang themselves with their own words.
Oh,
you
and
know?
don't we do that?
And you have to be willing, you know, when they come to get people, like Baldwin said, if they come for you in the morning, they'll be coming for me that night. And you have to be willing to be that dedicated.
So one of the things I also try to ask all my guests, and I know we're running out of time, what life skills help you to be the writer, the poet, the photographer that you are?
I have a very strong spiritual base.
Okay.
You know, my mother made sure we went to church. So I had a very strong spiritual upbringing. You know, I never once ever doubted the existence of God. And I continue my spiritual search, you know. I mean, that's why I mentioned that I'm a shaman and a priest, you know, of the Word. And you have to have that strong spiritual belief. So that has carried me through and will continue to carry me through.
Speaking of, because you've mentioned your mother and your family a number of times, how important is family to you?
It's extremely important. My mother was my rock, you know. Because we had 4 children, had 4 different fathers, my mother was the linchpin, you know. And she always believed in me. Family is very important. I wish that I had the support of, I have a very large and extended family by blood, but hardly any of them even care what I do.
But I know you have children.
Yes.
You have a daughter.
Yes.
And you have a granddaughter.
Yes.
What's the most important thing to you about being a father and a grandfather?
Well, because my father abandoned me, I only met him once for 5 minutes when I was 4. It made me the father I am to my daughter. It made me the doting father to my daughter. I didn't want her to experience the anguish I felt by not having a father. I wrote a poem recently in my journal. My mother killed my father. Not with a bullet, not with a knife, not with poison. She vaporized him.
One other question that I ask all of my guests is about STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and math. These are skills that are important to our youth because there's something that they're learning now, but is a lifetime benefit from. How do you use any of those in your daily life? Science, technology, engineering, art. We've already talked about art, so that one we're going to leave out. But science, technology, engineering, and math, how do you use those in your daily life?
Well, being a photographer, you're using science, so I have a Bachelor of Science degree. But, a writer has to be a sociologist, an anthropologist. You have to know all of these things because you never know how knowing that information is going to help you create a better metaphor or a better simile, Aristotle said this. He said, metaphor is the one thing that cannot be taught and is the true sign of genius. So, like Eugene Redmond, who's in this book, Dr. Eugene Redmond, he wrote me one day and said, Gwendolyn Brooks and I were talking about you. and he said, Gwendolyn said, oh, he's one of those genius poets, And if you want to know the ability or the gift of a writer, look at their metaphors, look at their similes. It's a job of the writer not only to use the language, but to create the language.
So Lamont, you and I could go on for hours, but unfortunately, our time has come to an end.
Yes.
So I just want to thank you again for being a guest on In Search of Knowledge.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Oh.
It's an honor.
Thank you. Wow. We haven't had a conversation like this in a long time.
Right.
If we can gather to march 1 million strong, then why can't we gather in small groups to resolve one small problem in our own lives? If we can spend millions of dollars on anything and everything, then why can't we put money aside as individuals or a group to accomplish one small financial goal? If we can put aside our differences and speak to each other without anger or calling each other out of our names, and give love and respect to each other for a few hours while marching, then why can't we come together for a week to work on solving one small problem? When we recognize that we have to begin the most important undertaking in our history of saving ourselves, our children, and our communities, that in order to survive in the 21st century, we have to focus our time and energy on loving ourselves for ourselves, then we are marching more than 1 million strong.